Hey, how's it going guys? My name is Aylwood and today we're taking a look at Blue Fire, a brand new game just released on pretty much all platforms, and to answer the ultimate question as always, is it worth your time? So, Blue Fire is a single-player, indie, fantasy, action-adventure 3D platformer. Set in an unusual magical world, you take on the role of a warrior of light and shadow, tasked with liberating this somewhat perished land. You'll be engaging in various platforming challenges, taking on an assortment of enemies, all while uncovering a seemingly deeper storyline as you progress. So aesthetically, the first thing I noticed when turning on the game was the kind of Breath of the Wild vibe you get from its visuals. Everything seems to have that charming, clean, light-hearted look to it that really reminded me of the Zelda title, especially due to the art style of its particle effects. Colours used are quite pale and weathered throughout, giving most areas of the game a light-hearted, desolate look to them while also providing a bit more vibrance with its foliage-covered areas, all of which are really brought to life by the game's many different lighting effects. Speaking of lighting, since most of your time is spent inside some sort of large structure with the odd natural light appearing on occasion, there is a big focus on ambient, character lighting and glow effects. These effects seem to complement the texture and colours of the game well, but the glow effects are probably this game's greatest visual asset. Things like torches, enemy attacks and even character eye glows are all incredibly intense and to some may be considered far too strong. I however quite like this overglow effect quite a lot, since it really brings out the character of the game considering its minimalist design. Other effects like the underfoot shadows and various particle effects are okay, but again pale in comparison to the game's very powerful glow effects. Textures and detail are not bad, pretty simple to the point designs that allow easy distinction between the various materials and objects of the game, especially when wet. Ground clutter is practically non-existent most of the time, and the more dynamic textures such as water, lava and the black and red glowing substances definitely stand out from the rest of the game's textures. The UI design is both slender and sexy, just the right ratio of size, information and effects to keep the screen clean, provide everything you need to know while also ensuring no hindrance on your focus area. Other screens like the various menus, inventory and shop screens are just as simple, but perhaps a little too simple. I didn't really notice any distinguishable features that make the interface unique to Blue Fire, which was quite a surprise, but nothing to lose sleep over. Level layouts are very nice, large open spaces with simple layouts and decent navigation. Due to the lack of ground clutter and very minimal designs, you could say they're a bit bare-boned, which if anything I actually preferred. Character and enemy designs are also okay. The devs seem to have gone for a specific, quirky design for the inhabitants of this fantasy world, which generally include emotionless faces, single color scheme characters with bold, glowing eyes of various color, all of which donning specific clothing and weapons for you to identify their role in this world. The protagonist also shares this design with the exception of his mask. Each character has decent animations overall, some of which could be better in terms of enemy pivoting and weak attack animation. I also found the antagonist's jump and dash animations to be a little weak considering his size and the rules of physics, but make up for this with his run and attack animation, not to mention the other abilities you'll unlock as you progress. Overall, a decent, charming, aesthetic quality that gets straight to the point and embraces the term simplistic. The very few OSTs I actually managed to listen to are not the best, fully orchestrated, drawn out, gentle soundtracks that do seem to match the light-hearted visuals well, except with an added dose of mystery and serenity. Their attempts to create a distinct main melody, however, were not exactly noteworthy. It seems like they focused a bit more on the background effects of each track, which has resulted in quite boring, easily forgotten OSTs that didn't really push the boat out in terms of creativity, even on the combat tracks. But again, this speculation is considering only the few tracks I listened to throughout my run of the game. In some areas, such as transition zones and void entrances, you don't actually get a soundtrack altogether. This I found was a much more immersive experience since it enhanced the enemy sounds, character footsteps and ambient sounds of the area very well. Speaking of the game's other effects, I have to say, very good. The jingles you hear when opening chests and completing challenges are very unique. Enemy and character sounds suit the visuals very well, and even the menu navigation and terrain sounds are very good. The NPC incomprehensible gibberish I actually didn't mind either. Overall, a seemingly standard soundtrack quality that is easily outshined by the game's impressive sound effects. Now for the gameplay. So Blue Fire doesn't have any difficulty options to choose from before you play. It is what it is whether you like it or not, just like every good game should be. To elaborate a bit more on the game's storyline, from what I gathered, you play as some sort of masked child of the fire whose sudden appearance seems to have been expected. You find out early on that darkness is taking over the world, slowly corrupting both citizens and gods alike. You wake up in a gigantic floating castle, speak with a few NPCs to discover your mission to liberate the souls of 5 godlike creatures within this monolithic structure in attempts to push the darkness back and subsequently save the world. So when you first start the game, you're shown an extremely short intro cutscene that introduces you to one of the coolest looking OG Yu-Gi-Oh cards ever. You're then brought straight to the playable protagonist, break out of your incubation tube, take control of your character and play. As with other action-adventure platformers, your general movement controls are pretty much as you would expect, with the addition of jumping, dashing, blocking, fireballing, and wall running. Dashing can be used while airborne or on the ground to evade attacks or traverse platforms. Blocking can be used to avoid damage taken, which often sends you flying backwards. Fireballing is simply a ranged attack that does poor damage, and wall running can be used when simply jumping on and running along a wall. There are way more controls in this game, such as double dashes, spin attacks, double jumps and more, all of which I didn't get a chance to unlock, which I'll explain in a moment. Blue Fire's gameplay concept in a nutshell is Hollow Knight combined with a 3D Zelda game. The only difference is a big focus on 3D platforming and mobility. This can be seen in its Zelda-like dungeons filled with keys, puzzles and backtracking, as well as its Hollow Knight checkpoint, death and equipment charm mechanics. If you're a fan of these kinds of concepts, this game may be something to consider. Other gameplay mechanics include currency that's gained from breaking objects and selling treasures, which you lose completely upon death. A checkpoint respawn system where shrines can be activated at the cost of currency. You can get shadow fragment drops from enemies which you use to increase your mana bar for fireballs and blocking. A spirit system where you can equip passive abilities at shrines for various combat advantages. A pretty plain equipment screen where you can change your weapons and clothing. You obviously have vendors to buy from and sell items to. Void entrances for platforming trials to increase your max HP. You heal hearts with fire essences that you get from breaking objects, and much more. I've definitely missed out a lot of specific mechanics here, but that's pretty much your need to knows covered. The combat in Blue Fire took me by complete surprise, I have to say. Considering your default 3-hit combo attack, the mobility aspect during an attack animation is very good. Directional input is very generous, your attack arc and range is just right, and getting out of danger quickly can be done by dashing at any time without the risk of commitment frames getting in your way. The airborne sword attacks will definitely take a bit of getting used to, but seem to be quite overpowered in terms of character relocation and speed, which is another welcome challenge to the gameplay experience. Enemy units obviously lack the huge mobility advantage of your character, but make up for this with somewhat unpredictable, speedy movements, decent amount of poise, as well as a reasonably high amount of damage dealt to the hero. My boss experience specifically, however, is extremely limited, so I couldn't exactly comment on boss fights as a whole, but looking at the gameplay trailers, they definitely seem to be the highlight of your combat experience. Overall, a seemingly impressive gaming experience that unfortunately I didn't get the unhindered opportunity to enjoy. So for the ultimate question, is it worth your time? Although Blue Fire seems to show promise as a finished product, the current state of the game, however, is pretty much unplayable. It's riddled with bugs, minor inconveniences, and definitely loves a crash report. I'm going to give this game a no contest. I played this game for only 3 hours total, and in that time I experienced 2 bugs, 4 hard crashes and 1 forced reset. In a game where if you die you lose all your currency, then have to spawn all the way back to a previously visited shrine, progression is near fucking impossible. Yes, this may be an individual experience thing since some players report no issues for over 10 hours gameplay, yet others couldn't get past the first 30 minutes and simply refunded their purchase. I was going to quit around the 1 hour 40 mark, but decided no, I don't want to process a refund for less than 2 hours gameplay. I'll just consider my purchase a donation to the devs. I thought to myself I may as well persevere and at least get the first temple done, and so I did, with no issues surprisingly, but the game's general instability has completely ruined my immersion at that point, so here we are. A few other points I didn't like about the game other than its instability are its slightly weak character animations when it comes to dashing, jumping and climbing. These I felt could be a touch more dramatic to match the character's size and physics, especially the non-existent cliff climbing animation. The default block ability is completely pointless since it fires you meters away from your enemy target when you block, which is a complete waste of seconds during fast-paced combat. Your underfoot shadows seem to disappear while above certain textures around the game, which makes the platforming that much more challenging. Since depth perception is difficult as it is when you're a super fast, less than a meter high hero, imagine what it's like with no underfoot shadows as well. And finally, the only way to gain currency in this game is from selling treasure items found in chests and breaking objects like pots and bone piles. This means unless you don't want to spend currency for some bizarre reason, breaking every single pot in sight is pretty much mandatory, especially if you want the ability to actually heal yourself, since healing items only come from resting at shrines and breaking those damn pots. As an extra kick in the teeth, if you're not stood directly below the gold pile that shoots up in the air when the object is destroyed, the gold scatters all over the floor around you. So if you actually had a gold pickup radius to speak of, you wouldn't need to walk directly into each individual piece of gold to pick it up. Imagine if you died and lost all of your gold. That's a lot of tedious pot breaking. 2 points I liked about the game, however, were its raw focus on platforming challenges and the camera angles. The game, from what I saw, was pretty much a playground of platforming goodness. The challenges were obvious and unmistakable, seemed to contain a lot of backtracking once specific later game abilities are unlocked, and also do give a sense of achievement once completing these challenges. Well, provided you don't die, that is, and have to tackle the same challenge yet again. The camera angles, though, I have to say, some of the best I've ever experienced in a 3D game. Fluid, precise, clean, brilliant collision physics, and keep a flawless focus on your character in the center of the screen at all times. If there's one thing the devs do not need to change, it's the camera angles. Unfortunately though, due to the game's current buggy state, I obviously cannot recommend this game to anyone, and due to the poor gameplay qualities mentioned and the bad taste in my mouth from this initial experience, I highly doubt I'll pick it up again either. If the game was more appropriately labelled as early access or beta version, then these issues would be completely understandable. But if that were the case, I personally wouldn't have purchased the game in the first place. Well guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, leave a like, subscribe if you want to see more games I'll be reviewing in future. You know me guys, I hate making negative reviews on the channel. But if you watch my videos on a regular basis, you know that time is a very precious commodity, so I hope this video contributes to the spending of yours wisely. But as always, all the best guys, take care.